Good afternoon. Now, I made a Super Bowl pick at the beginning of the season of Bengals Packers, and since that's out, and since I played a certain 7-year-old last night in Madden as the Bengals against his team, the Eagles, and we promptly threw a total of 15 interceptions. I hadn't played Madden in like 9 years, so it's probably the worst game known to mankind. Let's just go Bengals Eagles for my new Super Bowl prediction. Let's just get that on the record right now. All right,
7-year-old, you weren't hanging out with my nephew, were you?
I was. It was a very interesting game. He only likes to play with the Eagles for some reason, one of his 6 favorite teams. Good morning. I'm Steve Rabinowitz.
I'm Jay Kaplan.
I'm Anthony Strait.
I'm Joe Tufaro.
It's a very different introduction with that. Welcome to the football-focused edition of On the Sports Lines. So, first of all, let's welcome back Joe Tufaro of many different platforms. We haven't had him on the show too much this year due to a lot of different things, and due to Joe just taking over with restaurants and an empire one bar at a time. But we're going to talk a lot about it this morning, whether it be football that has passed over the last few weeks or the huge heap of football that we have going forward. This is an all pigskin show. So let's get right to it and go past the car crash that was Monday night. It was January 9th, 2023, Los Angeles, California. 2 brave teams went into battle over the college football playoff, and less than a half hour later, it was basically over. Flat like the sponsor Dr. Pepper would be after that time, whether you could open or not. The largest modern day championship whooping, 65-7. Georgia Bulldogs, winner. Horned Frogs of Texas Christian, big loser. This was a far cry from what we saw in the CFP semis on New Year's Eve. Can't have too much of a good thing, I guess. Jay, we're going to take away that Hypno Toad and give the Hypno Dogs the national title. Back-to-back daddies, first of the college football playoff era. What stood out to you in this game on Monday nights?
Yeah, you can't call it a contest, can you? You know, I'm not surprised that Georgia beat TCU to repeat as national champions, but I am surprised at how badly they beat him. I mean, when we previewed this game on the last show, I said that if TCU's offense became one-dimensional, that they stood a 0 chance against Georgia. I mean, by the time it was over, Georgia hadn't just put up 65 points, but also outgained TCU in total yards, 589-188. At one point, the Dogs had nearly as many points, 45, as they had plays, 48. What I didn't expect was that TCU's key players would be that overmatched and get completely shut down. I mean, quarterback Max Duggan was 14 of 22 for just 152 yards. It's less than 7 per attempt. No TDs through the air, 2 picks. He was sacked 5 times, had just 3 pass plays of 15 yards or more. TCU wasn't able to run the ball against the Dogs either. Running back Amari DeMarcado was held just 59 yards on 14 carries. No other Horned Frog had more than 9 yards, and Duggan had negative 38 yards rushing. Granted, most of that was the sacks, though he did run for the Horned Frogs' only score of the night. All-American wide receiver Quentin Johnson, 1 catch for 3 yards. Georgia cornerback Keely Ringo definitely upped his draft stock by rendering him completely useless. I said that, you know, Darius Davis came just for 100. 3 of those 101 came on 2 plays, with 60 coming on a single play. You know, the clock struck midnight on TCU's Cinderella story. They ran into a team that had more talent, was better coached, and just dominated them at all 3 phases of the game. Stetson Bennett put a capper on a college career that started as a walk-on and ended with him raising the national title trophy after accounting for 6 touchdowns, 4 passing and 2 rushing, and a 226.9 passer rating. Brock Bowers showed us why he's arguably the best tight end in the nation. Calm down, Notre Dame fans. I said arguably. With those 7 catches for 152 yards and a touchdown.
There's no arguments. There's no arguments.
Who put up 5 catches for 88 yards and 2 touchdowns, you know, showed us just how good offensive coordinator Todd Monken is at A, scheming and play calling, and 2, developing talent. The TCU had a hell of a season, and they earned their place in the CFP. They just ran into a Georgia Bulldogs team that could not and would not be stopped.
I'm not apologizing to you, Notre Dame. There's no argument. They'll
argue. No argue.
in that national semi.
I saw their tight end run wild
I
against
did too.
USC. There's an argument to
I
be
did
had.
too, but I think the problem with Brock is he's just built as good as any tight end we've seen in God knows how long. They just didn't use him a lot in that national semifinal, which is one of the reasons why that game was so close. Anthony, I know you're excited to talk about this really quickly, so put a little cap on the college football season.
I'm only talking about this in protest because it's our obligation to have to talk about this game. But let's be honest, and I just mentioned this before we were on the air. The most exciting thing that happened Monday night was the final trailer to the Ant-Man movie. But other than that, this game was over. Like, Rabbi was texting me, is it possible for a game to be over in less than what? Before the second hour of WWE Monday Night Raw? You got your answer. Yes, because it was over by halftime. Look, Max Duggan just got beat up on Monday night. I mean, he sacked him 5 times. He was held to 152 yards passing. Yes, he had the one rushing touchdown. But other than that, I mean, this was Super Bowl 20 like beatdown. And when you think about shades of Tony Easton getting a crack kick out of him by the Bills defense in that game, I mean, it was pretty bad. I mean, this was, and you feel bad because TCU has had a great season. They've definitely earned their way into the college football playoff. A tremendous game against Michigan, and it had this season end like this. I mean, this was Bishop Sycamore IMG all over again. And for those of you who don't know that, I would suggest you Google Bishop Sycamore. You'd be surprised what you'll find, or what you won't find for that matter. Yeah. But I mean, the Georgia Bulldogs, I mean, all season long, they have been the best team in the country. And it was a question of would a defense play like the defense we've seen all year, or would a defense get torn to shreds like they were in the semifinal? And the answer was, hey, look, we're so good, we can eat food on the sideline during a blowout. What are you, wings? Was it you hot wings on the sideline? Because
yes, they were. I think it was sometime in the third quarter that they actually ordered hot wings. I'm going to save you the any more talking on this, Anthony, so you can save your breath for something that you're more excited for, which is fine because again, this had the making. To me, at least, it was the largest spread in national championship history going in that era, and it certainly gone like it. And you think 13.5 was a lot. That's almost cake after immediately watching this game. Joe, you were talking about the officiating through this whole entire college football playoffs, and you thought they did an amazing job this week or on the Monday.
Yeah. We kind of know some of the guys on those crews because they're picked from different, they come from different conferences. So we knew who it was going to be, and they really did a nice job. They did a good job. The nice thing was the 2 games before, the week before, have been awful the last few years. Those have been the blowout games that have been unwatchable. To have 2 games go 4 hours long and you not want either one of them to end was pretty amazing the week before. And so those games, and again, I watched it with 4 other officials. So it's a different sort of game when we watch it, but it was fun to watch this year. The final, they did a really good job in. If you noticed, there were no flags in the second half at all because it was a blowout. They knew it's sort of like,
that's smart.
Yeah, and we didn't. It was funny. We watched the second half with the sound off because there was no sense even watching the game at that point. We just sat around and talked about different things, and every now and then just marveled at, oh my God, they're going to put 50 on him. Oh my God, they're going to put 60 on him. Oh my God, they're going to put 66 on him. So, but again, the officiating was well done, well, mechanics wise, call wise. They didn't have anything to clean up. It was nice. We always talk about the poor review guy that has to look at every play in college football and how much of a nightmare that job is. So he kind of got a half off also, which was nice. And they did a good job. So
I'll tell you this, the guys I feel for the most that night were the guys who had to call that game, because the minute you recognize you are going to basically have, the second half is going to be completely uncompetitive, and that like you're going to have to fill time with things more than just what's going down on the field because it's such a blowout. As someone who's done play-by-play in the past and in blowouts on either side, it's not those are games are hard to call. So I got a much respect for how they comported themselves and how they handled that.
Well, one thing that Kirk Herbstreit did during that game was accidentally spoil who Deion Sanders' Colorado was going to technically play in their first game, which they have since had to take off, which is Arizona State. It was originally actually scheduled to be TCU but that got postponed because of the early leaking. One thing that I noticed, Joe, especially from the national semifinal game, the two most important calls, and I thought that they really did a good job getting right, and there's still all these conspiracy theories about this, especially about the second one, is the Marvin Harrison call with the play where he eventually got injured and left the game, and that not being ruled targeting didn't matter.
No, that was a good call.
Right? That was a good call because they had aimed right for the shoulder.
The right
and
call.
the timeout on the fake punt, which is still, I think, the most important play of that game.
Brilliant.
And how people are still being like, "Ooh, he didn't get it off on time." It's like, he got it literally at the second. He did it.
And again, being that there's that obvious delay where you hear a timeout, you got to blow your whistle, you got to then jump out and do it. There's always going to be that reaction delay, even though, because you're kind of looking at him thinking at that, like in a field goal opportunity or something, where last 2 minutes you're thinking he's going to call timeout because you're like coaching the game yourself. In that instance, you're certainly not thinking he's going to call a timeout, so you're not really paying attention. And you have to understand it's only the one guy who's allowed to ask for the timeout, which is the head coach. So, you may hear other words behind you. You may hear, "Hey, timeout, timeout, timeout." Like it's somebody asking him if we should have it. It's tough with coaches talking in headsets because you don't know if they're talking to you, if they're talking to somebody else. So you kind of notice that he was coming down there, and to hear it on time was really good. The play with Marvin Harrison, we agree it wasn't targeting, but we did feel that if he had called a personal foul just for hitting him after the ball was already passed or something like that, that was a judgment call at that point. But we feel that it was good to leave it alone and just let them play. And of course,
judgment call.
Knock them out of the rest of the game. So.
It's a judgment call, but that was a legitimate football play. Granted, it was a bone-crushing hit, but it did. I agreed it did not rise to the level of targeting. And Joe, I see your point on the 50-50, whether or not it deserved an unsportsmanlike conduct for unnecessary roughness. But I think they made the right call there as well, and letting it go. Bone crunching hits happen in the sport all the time. It doesn't necessarily mean there was anything illegal about it.
No, and again, we don't get to see it 7 times in slow motion and from different angles. The guy that called it, the guy that's there is standing under the goalpost, and then there's a guy behind him on that pylon that saw that he stepped out of bounds. And so that was his call, that he stepped out of bounds. The guy that's standing right there sees the hit, which is tough when you're that close.
Yeah.
But he realized that it happened right away, just as the ball went by. So I thought that it all worked out well.
Yeah. Well done all the way around.
We should have brought some of those college reps in for some of the pro games in VK2, because that's another story for another time. We don't have enough. We don't have enough time for that. All right. Now we talk about Joe's favorite subject, the New York Jets. All right. The Jets blossoming 7-4 start to the season wilted quickly to 6 losses in a row. Bad Zach Wilson performance there, stupid coaching decision there, and quarterback play so inefficient that we're just going to call the people who were there in the rest of the season Exhibit A instead of anything else. So, Joe, we're going to quickly ask you some questions as we put a bad bow. I don't even know what the opposite of a bow is, but whatever it is, the Jets have it to end their season. So, Jay, let's start as we do the Jets post-mortem.
Yeah, the Jets can keep the narrative that they still want to develop Zach Wilson. And as I said on the last show, I still think Mike White is a serviceable QB2. And if he wants to return to Florham Park, the Jets should bring him back. But it's a no-brainer that the next QB1 for the Jets is not yet on their roster. And before they parted ways with Mike LaFleur, I would have said that Jimmy Garoppolo should be their prime offseason target. But in my opinion, I think the Jets need to hold off on pursuing a quarterback until they know who their new offensive coordinator is going to be. A Shanahan disciple that Saleh worked with in San Francisco, which would make Jimmy G a pretty seamless fit, or someone with a different offensive philosophy and background, in which case they might want to go in a different direction with who they look to have taken the snaps. Joe, as I've always said, and I said it to you before we came on the air, I've talked about a quarterback needing to be a good fit for the offensive scheme that his team runs. So with all this as a lead-in, what direction do you think the Jets should go to try and solve their quarterback quandary this offseason?
Well, I think as always, again, we pretty much agree on things here. I think that the mistake that was made was, and again, as good as LaFleur may be, and again, they had to bring him in late because of other issues that happened, but I think having a young first-time offensive coordinator with a quarterback who's had no success, who's young, who's coming in, is a difficult fit. I mean, I think you needed somebody that had a little gravitas that says, look, my system works. I've had quarterbacks that are running quarterbacks. I've had guys that I've had to rein in a little bit and say, okay, you need to do this before you take off. Do this, the different things, and use him to the best of his abilities. And, to go over to the Giants side, you say, okay, you brought in like a Mike Kafka, but they brought in a Shea Tierney, who's a quarterback's coach, who obviously can talk to Daniel Jones and to get a lot through to him in his own vernacular, let's say, being a young kid. So maybe Zach Wilson being a little bit immature, being a little bit, yeah, just a touch immature.
Little bit.
Even with the Kyler Murray stuff with, he wants to play video games instead of working. All this stuff has to be taken into account. And I think if you're going to take Zach Wilson and say, okay, we're putting all our effort, you need somebody who's established. You need someone who the fan base is going to say, okay, he's worked with so-and-so, look what they've done. The reason that Daboll gets a break on everything in the beginning was, hey, look what he did with Josh Allen. This is the same type of kid, right? He's the same height. He can run, Daniel Jones. So there has to be some comparison there. And I think because you brought in a young guy that didn't have any experience, you got a head coach that knows nothing about offense, doesn't even want to talk about it. You needed to have that really. So use the Rams, for instance, when they brought in McVay, they brought in a defensive guru, so he didn't have to worry about the defensive side of the ball, but he ran the defense. So you kind of needed to do the same thing with the Jets, is bring in Saleh, the defensive side, let him be a head coach that's more defensive laden, but then bring in a guy who knows offense and who is respected, and you can just say, go do it. Whoever it is, doesn't matter to me. I'm not going to go through names and stuff, but I think it's tough to bring in a first-time coordinator who's never done it before, make it, a first-time guy who you're promoting to that position. I think you need somebody who's worked with mobile quarterbacks, who's worked with young guys before and has developed them. Again, my philosophy, Jay. I think all these guys should stay in school a year longer or should sit on the bench for a year or two.
Yeah. And to that point, Joe, the Saleh and I think LaFleur as well, they admitted they made a mistake last year by not bringing in a veteran to, either to start the beginning of the season or, bare minimum to be an experienced voice in that quarterback room. Because as you said, you've got a first-time OC and, you have a kid fresh out of college that you're anointing as the franchise quarterback, but the other two guys in that room had barely taken any snaps at the NFL level themselves. There was no, for lack of a better phrase, there was no adult in the room in terms of the position itself. So, I firmly believe, that they have to bring in somebody, even if that guy is going to be a bridge, to while they develop Wilson, or a bridge to whoever they draft next. They need to have a veteran presence in the room. And the room itself, I think, benefited from having Joe Flacco, in that room this season, even though Joe's a shadow of his former self, and obviously you can't really roll him out there anymore. But I think they need to get somebody who's, in a middle of his career veteran who can be a bridge type quarterback, especially if they can't find anybody, especially if they're not going to go get Garoppolo or your Derek Carr, right?
Well, and again, go back to the Giants as our, comparison. Go back to Eli Manning, Kurt Warner, Derek Carr, all those guys that they brought in to be backups there was never just somebody to hold the clipboard. There was somebody there who's been in the league, who's done it, who can stand there and do it. Even with Daniel Jones, they said, Tyrod Taylor's perfect for this because he knows the system. He's, they're all mature enough to talk to each other. Davis Webb there, who knows the system, who's going to be a quarterback's coach someday, who's going to be an offensive coordinator someday.
Absolutely.
Those guys are able to sit there and talk to each other. Kafka's up in the booth, which is odd for the Giants, but he's got Shea Tierney down there who can talk to Daniel Jones, who gets, again, you need that communication part. And who knows how good LaFleur was at that, because again, it's brand new to him,
First time,
as well as being brand new to Zach Wilson. And you don't know about how do you get a kid like that to work harder, or how do you get him to translate into how do you study an NFL playbook versus a college playbook? There's a lot of changes there. So I think that was where the mistake was. If you say there's a mistake, I think LaFleur is going to be very good at what he does.
Agreed.
But he was put, again,
Tough situation.
Put him in the wrong positions.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to jump ahead of Anthony for a second because I want to kind of ask where you think the Jets should go with that position. You can go somebody who is still new to the game in the offense. It has never been an offensive coordinator in Brady from the Bills, or you have 3 former offensive gurus who used to be head coaches who are now out there in Frank Reich, Cliff Kingsbury, and everyone's never to be a coach again, Nathaniel Hackett out there. You got 3 interesting spots out there. Where do you think the Jets should go with this position? Do you think this is a position for an experienced guy?
Yeah, I think if Frank Reich wants to do it, to understand that he's going to be a head coach in another 2 years or so, that, that whole idea that you may lose him again, it was almost the Jason Garrett thing. If he was any good at all, you knew he was going to step into the next thing. You didn't know he was going to fail at that and then fail as being a broadcaster also.
Agreed.
If Frank Reich wants to do the job to say, hey, I want to show what I got for the next 2 years and I'll help develop this kid, but then I'm going to probably get a head coaching job. That's the direction I would go. I don't even mind a Nathaniel Hackett. Again, guys who go in as first-time coaches who have no experience at all, most of them don't last at that first job anymore because you don't get enough of a time to prove yourself, right? Parcells even after year 2 because of what happened to him. Not many guys make it through that initial period to the next step. A lot of them nowadays, because of this, what have you done for me lately, get fired pretty quickly. So I don't even mind in Nathaniel Hackett going back to what he does. It's even like there's a lot of guys who have done that, right? Steve Spagnuolo, not good as a head coach, but goes right back to what he's used to doing. And
Josh McDaniels is a big example of that too. I mean, we don't know if he's going to fail with the Raiders right now. He'll get a second year, but he was much better in his second stint with New England than he was in his first stint with New England as a coordinator.
Yeah, I mean, the interesting guy for me in terms of the candidates that are out there is a guy like Darrell Bevell, who has offensive coordinator experience at the college level, as offensive coordinator experience at the pro level, both in Pete Carroll's system out in Seattle, where he was for so many years, and, spent this past year with McDaniel in Miami, learning the Shanahan system that, LaFleur ran, that Saleh's used to, from his time in San Francisco. So Bevell's a guy who has multiple, has background in multiple philosophies. And to me, he's the intriguing candidate for this job.
I think the Jets would be better off. Again, they should fire their entire marketing team. They should, don't make everybody the anointed soul, but I think they should play more like an NFC team. They have been able to have some pretty good offensive linemen. Their running backs are good. They have good tight ends. Don't try to be this aired out San Diego Chargers from the 1970s all the time. Don't play like an
Cliff
AFC
Kingsbury
team.
is not the choice, is basically what you're saying here.
Don't go that way, right? Don't do that. You're not going to get certain. But again, it's this, we can get so-and-so. And it's like, get what you're supposed to get. Be who you're supposed to be. Don't try to be somebody else.
And honestly, I think a lot of that, I think the interesting thing to me is they were I think they were headed in that direction to begin with, before you basically had the back-to-back injuries of Breece Hall at running back, who was just starting to show, the talent and the skill set that made the Jets want to draft him in the first place. And do not discount what the injury to Elijah Vera Tucker on that offensive line did to hurt the Jets running game. I've been talking this kid up since before the Jets drafted him. I saw him play at USC. The fact that he can move from any position on the offensive line and basically play at an all-pro level there, you can't discount that. The hole he left when he got hurt, huge. Having both of those guys back next year will be a big lift, no matter who's playing quarterback.
And I think we even said that in the preseason thing of they had no depth, right? We said they had one running back in the room. They had nothing to fall back on. They didn't have a quarterback. They didn't have, if anybody got hurt, they had nothing. And that's what came back to bite them. So,
all right, Anthony, let's close this down in this segment.
Yeah, one of the bright spots to Jets this season was the defense. I mean, you talked about how they need to switch to being more of an NFC style team. The Jets defense went from near the bottom of the league a year ago to 4th overall this season, and pretty much won a couple of games early in the season during that 7-4 stretch, despite the fact that their quarterback situation was kind of in a flux. They got three guys that was named All Pro this week, and Quentin Williams, CJ Mosley, and Sauce Gardner. But despite all of that, down the stretch in games against Jacksonville, Minnesota, and obviously Seattle, the defense got off to slow starts. And obviously when you have an offense that's struggling, falling behind by more than a touchdown early on, didn't help the Jets any better than the offense could possibly shoot them in the foot. But building on this year, and obviously the drastic turnaround, where do you see where do you see where the Jets can improve defensively on that side of football, or at least build on what they were able to do this year?
Yeah, well, I think the only reason they were in any of the games in the second half was because of their defense. And, the defense had to be on the field a lot in the second half of the year because, again, if you saw how teams played them, especially Belichick, who you have to look at as the genius, he had zero respect for the Jets offense, and he would go for it on fourth. Whatever he needed to do, because it didn't matter. They're going, oh, what are you throwing there? You're stopping the clock. And it's like, who cares? The offense can't move against anything. So, you put that defense in a tough spot every week, and they feel like they got to win the game, and they feel like they got to do everything. I'll give props to the kid, to Gardner. He played very, very well. They did not. They started to shy away from him a little bit, which was nice to see. And so he kind of proved himself. And I think that'll all, go. Of course, what you want to do is get somebody on the other side who's a little bit more stable, get another nickel corner that you can put out there so you can do it. But with their pass rush, again, it kind of protects those corners, protects the other guys. They need linebackers just like every other team in this. It seems to be the position that Jay and I defense was always linebackers. And now there's a dearth of linebackers. You may get one guy on each team that you look at and go, oh, he's really good, But you need speed guys now at linebackers. You need to be able to have guys like Landon Collins who can come up and stop the run, but can also cover the tight end or cover a back. And so I think they need to find some more. I think, CJ unfortunately keeps getting hurt. He came back and played well for a couple of games and then gets knocked out again. So I think the Jets defense needs to do is just continue to, obviously they need to pay Quentin Williams, which will put a little bit of a hurt on their payroll, but on their offensive side. But I think you just need to continue to get athletic guys on that defense, and they'll knows what he's doing and is going to have a coordinator there that always knows what he's doing. So I think they're solid on that side of the ball. We always talk about this, if you could split a team up, right? If you could get so-and-so's offense and so-and-so's defense, the Jets would certainly be one of those defenses that you choose along with the San Francisco and along with the Giants that you would put in that conversation and say they really can dominate a game, but they can't be out there for 75, 80, 90 plays. It's just impossible to hold anybody down for that long.
By the way, the Jets are right at the cap for this offseason. They are literally only have $3 million in spending. So you're gonna see some changes over in that spot for part. All right. Now from a team who is now on 12 years with no playoffs, who might have the longest active drought of the four major sports by this time next year, to a team who just ended a drought that was only half as long, but felt like 12 years. The New York Giants are back in the postseason. Despite a 3-6-1, damn that one, finish to the year, the Giants were 9-7-1, solid enough to have gotten themselves a 6th seed in the NFC wildcard round. Their reward, back to where they were just 21 days ago on Christmas Eve in US Bank Stadium playing the Minnesota Vikings. That December 24th game that ended with a Viking kicker 61-yarder, third time in a decade losing on a 60-yard field goal at the gun. Are you serious? Loss to the Minnesota Vikings 27-24. That was the last full-strength G-Men loss in the regular season, not counting last week. So let's ask Joe about this Sunday at 4:30 battle. Jay, lead off.
Yeah, and interestingly enough, for me personally, this game is going to be a matchup of my niece versus my nephew. Niece's daughter is a Vikings fan. Her son is a Giants fan. So it'll be interesting trying to keep those two from killing each other when I'm there.
There are 4 helmets, by the way, in that basement. So there's always, because Connor.
The only two that matter will be the Giants.
There are 6 favorite teams, by the way, of Connor.
I know my nephew.
To let you know in order. So so it's kind of that way. Let's just put a caveat on that.
There we go. My nephew loves football. What can I tell you? Okay, so Joe, the last time the Giants played the Vikings, they deviated from what has been their preferred offensive scheme. Heavy on the run game with their running backs, designed and improvised quarterback runs with Daniel Jones, and quick passes that got the ball out of his hands and into those of his playmakers so they could create yards after the catch. They paired that with the occasional deep shot downfield when the opportunities presented themselves. Then they went with a pass heavy. So when they played the Vikings in the regular season, they went with a pass heavy scheme against the NFL's 31st ranked pass defense, calling only 17 running plays compared to 49 dropbacks for Jones. They moved the ball well. They put up 445 total yards, with Jones going 30 of 42 for 334 yards, almost 8 yards an attempt. One TD, 1 interception, is only one in the last 6 games. 92.8 passer rating, and it almost got them to win. They just left too much time on the clock and allowed the Vikes to get into position for that 61-yard, field goal that won the game that Rabbi mentioned. For this rematch in the NFC wildcard game, do you see them reverting to form offensively or repeating that pass-heavy game plan they used last time? And who or what will be the key for the offense with either scheme?
Yeah, it was funny because that was completely different than normal. Even the announcers who have been off all year long on Giant games. Notice they said, they haven't had any called runs for Daniel Jones today. They haven't done this. He hasn't been using his legs, blah, blah, blah. But again, I think that's this coach is we do what we have to do against what we see. And if you're going to put 8 guys in the box because you think Barkley's the guy that you have to stop because you feel that you've read all the stuff about Daniel Jones, how he's loose with the football and how he can't do this and he can't make tight throws and he can't throw the ball long and he doesn't have a strong arm. If you read all that stuff, you put 8, 9 guys in the box and stop Saquon and you win the ball game. Well, it didn't quite work out that way. They decided to go a little bit more open up. They got guys on slant patterns, which worked really well. It's something we haven't seen on our offense in years. I've seen it against us plenty, but have not seen any on our offense. But they got a lot of those. They got Slayton, Richie James caught a couple of balls. Bellinger was good. Really were able to move the ball in the air, like you said, with the quick throws and different things that they used. Of course, the touchdown that tied the game or led to the tying 2-point conversion was a 27-yard run by Barkley on a 4th down play. So, they do know how to look up and say, okay, we've got you backed off. And so we'll run the ball now. We'll draw you back up and we'll change to what we're doing. So I think their schemes really work well and they can obviously do either one. I know we all watch the games and most of us are rooting for the Giants at the time. If you've noticed, you feel good now on 1st down when Barkley gets 3 yards. You're like, oh, okay, fine. That's all we need. 3 yards here. We'll throw one of those little swing passes. We'll do something. I'm not worried about Daniel Jones converting on 3rd down anymore. He's very good at 3rd and 6, 3rd and 7, 3rd and 11. guys have learned to go that yard past the sticks and come back instead of going to the stick and coming back. They've really made a lot of conversions on third down lately. And so I think you feel more confident in that whole thing. So I don't know. I mean, I think it really comes down to what are we going to see from Minnesota? Are they going to change up? Are they going to say, okay, we need to play a little bit more zone. We need to play a little bit more deep zone so guys don't get behind us. And then that'll open up underneath. And Barkley will get the ball more on, throwing the ball. Also, I guess he's the team's leading receiver with Richie James as far as number of receptions. So they have all these options now. And who is excited to play in this game, who wants to go back to that year one, let me show you what I can do. But never putting himself in harm's way or putting the ball in harm's way, which is valuable. Not to be a Reggie Bush where I want to be the star of this and I'm going to try lateraling the ball and doing all kinds of crazy things. It's more of a controlled rage on his point at this point where he just goes ahead and gets the extra couple of yards instead of trying to hurdle the guy back inside and run everything for a touchdown. But that drive is there. And I think he's going to be key to this is how much can they get him around the edge? How much can they get those lead blocks, those pullers to get around and make some hay on that? And then let Daniel Jones, which is 70% completions, with nobody catching the ball, the three of us, we could probably give all those guys a run for their money. I think that I think it's amazing what they've done with who they have. Our friend Chris Delgado, I was talking to him last week. He said, this team's like a waiver wire team. There's nobody out there except for Jones and Barkley, and they're able to do all this stuff. And again, they're not scoring a ton of points. They put up over 30 against Indianapolis, but
everybody does.
Defense, coupled with the, who doesn't? Coupled with
But
that.
again, I do want to say this though, in an era where you do it in a situation where a playoff spot is on the line though, and do it so effortlessly as the Giants did in that first half. I still take stock in it, and I take stock. By the way, I have to give Richie James some credit just because of the biggest low that he has. I wanted him released after the Seattle game. I think a lot of Giant people wanted him released. And he ended up with 57 receptions, had 8 in this game, by the way. And he's going to be a very interesting part of this team, especially tomorrow. And I think rematches are so weird. I'm going to get to my point in a little bit, but Anthony, let's talk to you.
Yeah, you go back to that game on Christmas Eve. The good news for the Giants defense is they held Devin Cook under control. He only had 64 yards on 14 carries. The bad news was Justin Jefferson and TJ Hawkinson put up big numbers, combined for 25 catches, 242 and 3 touchdowns. And obviously, Jefferson caught the pass that set up that 61-yard field goal that obviously led to the Vikings winning that game. What are the defensive keys that the Giants have to address to make sure that they can walk out of US Bank Stadium on the other side of the coin this time and win it and moving on to the next round?
Well, I think the key to this week has been, and the conversation this week has been, it's the first time we've had a healthy defense all year long. So having Ojulari back, having Adoree Jackson back, having McKinney back, who didn't play in the last game, changes all those matchups. So with McKinney back, and Hawkinson's not going to see Darnay Holmes all day long. He's going to see Landon Collins, and he's going to see maybe doubles on safeties. And so all those matchups change. Darnay Holmes goes back to covering the running back or some other receiver, and you're able to double Justin Jefferson a little bit more. You're able to slide a few more guys. Thielen's really hasn't done much. He may be the key to this if all of a sudden he wakes up and has 14 catches or something. That could hurt us a lot. But I think, as Wink Martindale said, Justin Jefferson's top 2 receivers. And by the way, he's not number 2. And so, without giving him too many props, without coming right out and saying he's the best, he said he's the top 2. And by the way, he's not number 2. So, but Anthony, if you look at it, you go, okay, you played them to a tie with missing 3 guys on defense, and their top 2 guys, you allowed them to get their stuff, but you kept the other guy down. So if you can bring in now, again, you got a healthy Landon Collins, you got McKinney, you got all these other guys coming back, Love playing good. And then all these guys, and again, this is where we differ from the Jets and the Giants we were talking about earlier in the year. Look at all these guys that have gotten to play in big spots and who've won games, McLeod and a couple of these other guys, Fabian Moreau, and all these guys that have come back in now and have played. So you're not scared to throw them out there in certain situations. So if you play 5 or 6 defensive backs is going to be blitzing at some point. So, and if you watch how they attacked Kirk Cousins last time, they did blitz in obvious situations and he would throw it to a spot. And guys like Darnay Holmes and stuff couldn't keep up with Jefferson or weren't clever enough to figure that's where that ball has to go. I feel much better having McKinney back, having Dory Jackson back, having Landon Collins in there, saying he can only throw it 7 to 8 yards because he's going to be under pressure at this point. So knowing you've got somebody behind you, maybe you can beat Justin Jefferson to that spot. Maybe you can get to that spot a little bit earlier, make him throw it away. I think it's exciting for Giant fans because the injury report said nobody on Friday, which was in a game where everyone participated, no one's hurt at all, and they're all going to play, and especially on defense to have those extra weapons, because Thibodeau has been fantastic and he's really grown into that spot and he showed that he was worthy of that pick and all the hype that he got, just like Gardner was. But you put Ojulari on the other side and then you start sending guys from the backside that you can with Jason Pinnock, who they got from the Jets, and guys that they brought in again who have played big roles. I think that's the exciting part about this defense. And to just keep that, when coming, but you don't know from where and you don't always know when, and he gets you in 2nd and 12 and you stop that run on first down. That's big for them. And what happens on first down?
All right. Before we close the book on this game, I was going to say which of the wide receivers or what's the biggest offensive weapon of this game, but I'm looking at Kirk Cousins for a second. We've made the jokes that it depends on when you play him. Luckily, this is a 4:30 game on Sunday where he has had 2 of his worst games this season, one against Dallas, losing 40-3. This is Kirk's 4th, believe it or not, playoff game. He actually had one back in 2015 for Washington. What do you expect from Kirk Cousins in this game? Because Kirk is kind of like the whole entire factor, because if we've seen in Minnesota's losses this year, especially the Green Bay game, especially the Dallas game, the first mistake that Kirk Cousins makes is essentially the one that takes the roller coasters off of the rails. Now, considering this is the Giants and the Vikings, I'm 95% sure that this game is going to end in a 1-possession game, but who the hell knows? So what do you really expect with Kirk Cousins this Sunday?
Well, again, he's a guy that, runs the offense the way it's supposed to be run. He doesn't do too many things out of the box. He's not a running quarterback, so they'll know where he is. They'll be able to pen him in. And then again, you have Dexter Lawrence going up against the center that hasn't played all year long because he's been hurt, and they're going to stick him back in there because they think the communication will help. Well, he better be physically ready to go up against Dexter Lawrence, because we've seen Dexter tackle the quarterback and the center back in. So like he did in the Indianapolis game. So I think all that pressure up the middle, Jalen Smith blitzing from there, getting Ojulari and Thibodeau to cut those edges off so he has nowhere to go, nowhere to look. I think he's going to make a few mistakes. I think you're going to either see a sack fumble or you're going to see a poorly thrown ball, or again, getting his arm hit as he's throwing it. I don't want to put it all on Kirk. I think he's going to be harassed so much that that's where you get that tipped ball out of his hand, or you get the guy to stop the follow through, Jay, as you know, is the worst thing for a quarterback. So something will come up short. And again, having ball hawks back like McKinney and Dory Jackson and a couple of the other guys, they made Jalen Hurts look pretty normal now run in the Eagles game, but they made him look pretty mortal with the interception they had on him. And they were able to cover those guys for the most part in the Eagles game in the second half, especially. And I think that's the key to this game also, guys, just to kind of go back to an overall view. This team has been down 17 points to the Packers at halftime. Team's been down to the Vikings. This team's been down to a lot of teams all year long at halftime where you go, they're still young, they're still learning. I didn't expect to win this game anyway. And all of a sudden they come back, right? Baltimore, they were losing, but a bunch of really good teams that they were losing at halftime. Jay's going to look it up for me. There are a bunch of good teams that they're to come back because that defense gets better and better and better as the game goes along, not only from conditioning standpoint, but having a Wink Martindale, who, as much as the announcers, again, color guys want to make him a one-trick pony. Oh, you're going to get blitzes, but they're smart blitzes. They're at the right time. They're from different spots. They're not just all-out garbage blitzes, leaving the guy one-on-one. And we talked about this in the preseason. He's not just a one-trick pony. The guy is smart. And he knows when to do it and from where to do it and how to disguise it. And even if you don't disguise it well, sometimes he gets your attention over here because it's really coming from that side and makes guys change. And I think it was I guess it was the Indianapolis game was so poor to watch, but hot receivers that the quarterback misses. So, if he doesn't throw it to the right spot, they're going to be able to get to him a little bit. I think they get 2 or 3 sacks on him. You realize in that last game that they played, if that, you always go back to clock management and coaching and all kinds of stuff. But, the play before they throw the screen pass to Justin Jefferson, he gets sacked. And he gets sacked all the way back, right, at their own 40-yard line. So he's throwing Hail Mary if the next play doesn't work. But they happen to get 17 yards on that little screen pass. If they had gotten 15 yards, the guy doesn't make it. And it was funny because they talked to Daboll after that game, and he said, the guy's what, 5 for 17 from 50 plus yards.
You're forcing them to hit from 61.
So I mean, your job was to stop him at
again. Does he not know the Giants' history over the last few years?
But that's
all I'm going to say.
The defense actually did what they were set up to do. Because Daboll said all week long when they had conversations in the coach's office, he said, if you stop them at the 45, they're dead because they can't kick a field goal from there.
Right.
And sure enough, that's where it was at the 44, and he kicked it. So what are you going to do?
It's going to be a very interesting game on Sunday. Considering that both of these teams are kind of mirror images of each other. It's just that the Vikings had a lot of easier games, and the Giants just had a lot of harder games in the second half of the year. So,
and yet the Vikings still had 11 games that were one score, and they come in with a negative point differential.
Yes. It's insane, and it's
because the games that they lost big, right? They lost 37, they lost by 27.
3-3, yeah.
I'd like to see it flipped. I'd like to see Graham Gano kick a 56-yarder and win the game and go play.
By the way, again, Graham Gano is one of the fucking people who have kicked a 60-yard field goal to beat the Giants in regulation, which is hilarious. All right.
Yes, I know.
All right, so guys, I'm going to cliche you to death here. Sometimes the rematch is good is as hard hitting as the first. Sometimes the sequel is as good as the original. Sometimes chapter 3, you know what I mean. I love rematches, and the other 5 wildcard rematches, and this one included, by the way, are all sequels. 2 were played early in the season. 3, they're playing for the 3rd time because, as the NFL contract says, when you are division rivals, you are contractually obligated to play twice in the regular season. So we're all going to take a look at a game. We might do some crosstalk here and there. I don't know. It depends if we're feeling froggy or not, or if we actually like the game. This one I do like. Anthony, we'll start with you. And that's the game that's tonight. I'll let you say Duval, don't worry. The Jacksonville Jaguars beat the Los Angeles Chargers 38-10 in week 3. And that was at a sold out, I'm kidding, it's SoFi Stadium in LA during a Chargers. but that was in LA. This was a change of venue now. We're in Jacksonville for a night game tonight. That's the Saturday the 14th. Guys, Anthony, the teams could not be farther apart than they were that many months ago, yet they're still playing in a playoff matchup right now.
Yeah, here's the thing, too, about both teams. And obviously, they're coming off one playoff jump themselves. The Chargers first time in 2018. Then the postseason, the Jaguars since 2017 when they went to the AFC Championship game. By the way, they're playing the frozen tundra of Duval County because it's going to be in the 40s. Unusually cold for this time of year in Jacksonville, Florida. But yeah, I mean, they're two different teams from what we saw earlier this year when Jacksonville won 38-10. First off, number one, Justin Herbert was not healthy. He was playing through a couple of fractured ribs, was beat up. He went 25-45, 295 in that game. 55% completion percentage, which is among the lowest of any game this season. And Keenan Allen was out. Well, the irony to that is his other top target, Mike Williams, is out today because Brandon Staley, for whatever reason, and only known to Brandon Staley, decided that in a meaningless game with 12 season already locked up, he would play his starters to the third quarter of a football game, late in the third quarter of a football game that didn't mean anything to them. And now Williams is out with a back fracture for the entire postseason. But besides that point, Justin Herbert was third in the NFL in passing yards per game at 278, and he's going up against the 28th ranked passing defense of the Jacksonville Jaguars. So if the Los Angeles Chargers are going to do anything, it's going to be on the arms of Justin Herbert. On the flip side, tough week against Tennessee for all things considered. I mean, he threw for 212 yards, but missed a wide open receiver in the end.
Twice. There were two times when he missed wide open receivers during the game, actually.
And the game was won by the other Josh Allen on the defensive side of football. Yes, we have to call him the other Josh Allen nowadays. It's nothing personal. It just happens. But I expect the Jaguars and a lot of the offense go through play action. So Travis Etienne is going to be a big part of the running game. He finished over 1,200 yards after he became a starter halfway through the year. And that opens up a lot for Trevor Lawrence downfield. I think back to that Thursday night game against the Jets and that monsoon that was taking place at MetLife Stadium. A lot of Jacksonville big plays was off the play action and being able to get chunks of yards downfield. So it's going to be a key game for Jacksonville to try to stretch the field, and also can they protect Trevor Lawrence too? I mean, Khalil Mack and Joey Bosa, but Bosa finally healthy. He's only played a couple of games this season. They're obviously going to be trying to get in the backfield, and it's going to be on Jacksonville's offensive line to hold up. But if you look at it, that both these teams, this is a game that could go either way. It could be a high-scoring affair, or it could be a defensive slugfest. Only because both these teams have been so topsy-turvy as far as the season. So remember, the Chargers got off to a slow start, finished the year on a 5-2 spurt. The Jaguars obviously were on that winning streak to catch and pass Tennessee against the postseason. But a couple of those games were very ugly wins, to say the least. So, I mean, this is of all the rematches, this is probably one of the more unpredictable of the games this weekend.
One thing that I'm very interested in is, by the way, first of all, caveat to the week 3 game. That was a game that Justin Herbert should never have been starting because he got a rib injury in week 2 against the Kansas City Chiefs. That was a game-time decision. I don't think he finished the game because eventually that was probably Herbert's worst game of the season, and that's probably why. Not even close. Also, one thing I noticed about that Jaguars-Titans game last week, and I've watched every play of it, as I am contractually obligated to do sometimes for work, is the Jaguars, Travis Etienne, they ran the ball way too much. I like Doug Peterson a lot as a coach, and I hate Doug Peterson a lot as a coach at the same time for many different reasons, but he was way too overcommitted to the run. And very rarely can you say that. And even in points where you should be passing because you have good matchups out there. Jacksonville has a very good offensive weaponry set to go along with a rising defense. They kind of made the game harder than I think it should have been. Give all credit to the Titans in that game. Josh Dobbs is a tier 4 quarterback, as Jay says, but did the job as much. Tier 3.5. Tier 3.5, but he kept that game close. I'm very interested to see this game though, because I think both of these teams are evenly matched. I think the coaching is a huge advantage Obviously, I think if Joe knows which way I'm going within the coaching in that situation, Peterson has done a much better job with this talent than Brandon Staley has done with this talent. And I think the atmosphere is going to be great. Jacksonville has been very clamoring for this game. And it's going to be very fun.
I have to say,
I think that's the perfect
audience understands. Anytime we talk about the Jacksonville Jaguars, Anthony is contractually obligated to do that.
All right.
So the best thing that will happen to the Chargers is they lose this game and they fire the coach. That'll be
that would be an amazing thing, but unfortunately, I think the playoff appearance is going to take that away this year. We have a lot.
Could have had one last year. Could have had one last year. Could have easily
had one last year if they had just ran out the clock. All right, Jay, Tony Banks, Trent Dilfer, Joe Flacco. These are three quarterbacks that the Baltimore Ravens probably wish they had starting this week against the Cincinnati Bengals. In week 5, the Baltimore Ravens needed a game-winning field goal at home to beat the Cincinnati Bengals 19-17. Those two teams met again last week, and they're going to do it again tomorrow as well, since he won that game 27-16. Both those games are not true benchmarks. The Ravens won't be as healthy as they were in matchup 1, to say the least, but they did rest a lot of people last week, kind of in their head thinking they're going to have this matchup again, and they don't like a coin flip as much as anybody else does. What are you expecting here for the threefold?
Well, since you kind of led with the Ravens, I'm going to switch up how I had this set up on my in my notes, and I'll kind of go that way. So I'm going to tell you guys what I'll be watching for from each team. And with the Ravens, it's going to be who's playing quarterback and the effect it'll have on their offense.
Is it you? Is it
no,
you? Are you going to Cincy tomorrow?
I asked my agent, if John Harbaugh placed a call, but apparently it didn't happen. And as a Steeler fan, I'd have to turn in my Steeler Nation card if I actually donned, Baltimore purple and black. So, I would have to turn it down anyway. Lamar Jackson tweeted out, recently that he won't be able to play in the wildcard matchup against the Bengals as he has a PCL grade 2 sprain that's on the border of being a grade 3 strain, and he still has inflammation in and around his knee. So this is going to be the 10th consecutive December-January game he'll missed over the past 2 seasons. And to make things worse, backup quarterback Tyler Huntley is dealing with a shoulder injury that's impacted his effectiveness, made him more of a bystander at workouts over the past 2 weeks. Now, while Huntley did resume throwing in Thursday's practice, giving the Ravens some hope that he'll be ready to go on Sunday, and it's looking more and more likely. But the offense has struggled, whether it's Huntley or QB3 Anthony Brown under center. Brown had 3 turnovers in the Week 18 loss, leading to 21 Bengals points. Settled down as the game wore on, did manage to put up 286 passing yards, but he averaged only 6.5 yards per attempt on 44 throws, completed only 19 of them. That's 43% completion percentage. He was sacked 4 times. That performance, while providing some game experience, doesn't bode well for the Ravens' chances if Brown has to start or play at any point Sunday night. Baltimore has scored a combined 75 points over its last 6 games of the regular season. That's the second fewest points scored by a playoff team in the Super Bowl era. The only team that was worse was Arizona in 2014, and they lost to Carolina on wildcard weekend. Since Jackson went down, the Ravens have dropped to the bottom 5 in points per game, passing yards per game, passer rating, red zone touchdown percentage, ranking 30th or worse in all but passer rating. Huntley being able to start would give the Ravens a better chance than if they had to go with Brown, but not by much, as Huntley has put up bottom 5 marks in yards per attempt, touchdown to interception ratio. With Jackson, as Rabbi said, they beat the Bengals in week 5, 19-17. Without him, it's going to be a struggle for that offense to put up even that many. And this is the problem with the Ravens. With Jackson, they're a tough out every game. Without him, they're expansion level. And the 11 games that Jackson started and finished this season, Ravens are 8-3, average 25 points per game. In the 5 games that he hasn't played, including the one where he left at the end of the first quarter, 2 and 3, averaging just 12.5 per game. It's a really tough road to hoe, particularly against a team as good as the Bengals, who come to the playoffs on an 8-game winning streak. The only chance the Ravens have here is if their defense can keep the Bengals in check, forcing Burrow to check down, which helps the Ravens keep everything in front of them and limits Jamar Chase from beating them downfield. Burrow's averaging just 7.2 yards per downfield attempt against the Ravens, and his passer rating against those type of throws is just 71.7. Against the rest of the league on those types of throws, 111.3. Now, the Ravens need to win the turnover battle and the time of possession battle, and they do that by leaning into their rushing attack. J.K. Dobbins, who was rested last week, will be available. He averages 5.7 yards per carry. And they also kind of need to incorporate more heavier use of 22 personnel, which is 2 running backs, 2 tight ends, and only 1 receiver, using either outside zone concepts, especially when the Bengals show a 5-man front, or gap concepts like, guard tackle power type plays. In the 2 games against the Bengals this season, the Ravens have rushed for 122 yards when they use 22 personnel groupings. If they can do that, find a way to get the ball in the passing game to tight end Mark Andrews, who was also rested in week 18. He's a matchup nightmare for the Bengals, especially if they can free him up on over and seam routes. That's where he excels. And especially on 3rd down when they need to move to chains or in the red zone, then they have a chance. It's a slim chance, but a chance nonetheless, because this is an AFC North game, even though it's, technically a wild card game. As for the Bengals, what I'm going to be watching is how they'll be able to protect Joe Burrow and execute their offense with the entire right side of their offensive line injured. They lost right tackle La'el Collins in week 16, lost right guard Alex Kappa in week 18. Neither will play Sunday night's wildcard game against Baltimore. It'll be up to 2nd-year tackle Hakeem Adeniji and 4th-year guard Max Sharping, who's making just his first start ever on Sunday. They're going to be tasked with keeping the Ravens pass rushers from getting to Joe Burrow. Cincinnati is 24th in sacks allowed, but Burrow still finished 7th in next-gen stats. And posted a 93.4 passer rating and an 8-3 touchdown interception ratio while under pressure. We know he can handle having blitzers come at him from all angles. We saw that in the divisional round last year, but it won't be easy without the usual starting right side of his offensive line, especially against the Ravens defense that finished tied for 5th with 48 sacks. They had 5 in the 2 games against the Bengals. You add to that, the Bengals offense has not exactly been all world during this 8-game winning streak. They managed just 3 points in the second half last week. Didn't score at all in the second half in a narrow week 16 win over the Patriots. Only 3 in the first half on a field goal at the halftime gun in the week 15 win over the Bucs. And even without Lamar Jackson, the Bengals shouldn't think they can just show up and that'll be enough to advance to the divisional round. Look, we all know about Burrow and his wide receivers, led by Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, both of whom topped 1,000 yards this season. But the Bengals need to find their running game. After they lost to the Ravens in week 5, they shifted from a wide zone run scheme to a shotgun-based downhill gap run scheme. And from week 5 to week 14, they averaged 4.6 yards per carry and ranked 2nd in the NFL in rushing success percentage at 51.3. The league average over that 8-game span, 39.7. But over the last 3 games, during which they lost that starting right side of their line, they ranked 31st in rushing success percentage at 27%, dead last in average yards per carry at 2.8. If they can get back to even a league average run game with Joe Mixon and Samaje Perine, the Ravens won't be able to throw the kitchen sink at Burrow, and that's going to allow the Bengals to execute their standard 3- and 5-step drop passing concepts with, slant flats, curl flats, stick smash, and follow routes, and nobody runs them better. Burrow's vision allows him to process the field quickly, anticipate the throwing windows, and deliver the ball on time and in rhythm. He's had excellent success against the Ravens, especially on throws of 10 air yards or less, 22 of 34. If the Ravens decide to only rush 4 and drop 7 into coverage and play top down in the secondary, Burrow has to take the throws that are available. And remember that a quick slant to Jamar Chase can turn it into a 20-plus yard play very quickly, given Chase's high-end catch and run skills. Look, Bengals have won 10 of their last 11, including those 8 straight. They have the NFL's best winning percentage since week 6. The reason is Joe Burrow, who's 2nd in the league in passer rating and passing yards in that time. If the new right side of the O-line can open up holes for the running game and keep the pocket relatively clean in the passing game, then Burrow and his playmakers have a better than good chance to win this AFC North rubber match. And at the end of the day, guys, I got to believe, I think the Bengals are going to get out of this one with the W.
Just a question of will it be close? And again, the only reason you think it would be close would be AFC North. Although I do have to say,
matchup, and you know what? Yeah. You got 2 teams that know each other really well.
Yeah, but also Stu Hundley will help a lot more than Anthony Brown would, or whatever Brown. I think it's Anthony Brown. I don't even
Anthony
remember.
Brown.
I don't even. Yeah, than would in that passing game, and it's going to be a very tough road to struggle. Hey, the Bengals are finally getting the luck after all of those bad Pittsburgh Steelers matchups luck that they had in prime time in 2016.
Hey, Rabbi,
right.
you know how I feel. I always feel that if it's a close matchup on the other parts of the game, it's going to come down to quarterback play, and we know the Bengals have a decided advantage at the sports premier position.
I can say, poor these teams having to start 7th-round draft picks, but Joe, it's been so long since the first meeting between the Seattle Seahawks and the San Francisco 49ers. Trey Lance started in week 2. Yes, Trey Lance. He got injured in that game. Jimmy G finished, and the Niners won 27-7. Week 15 in Seattle, the Niners were playing their first road game with mystery relevant Brock Purdy, who will become the first quarterback since 1950 to start his playoff debut as a 7th rounder. And by the way, the results stayed the same. It was 21-13 Niners. Do we expect anything different in round 3?
No.
And that's your analysis.
No, I think, after watching this team, it's so funny because all year long, there's been this narrative by Colin Cowherd that Jimmy Garoppolo is, the savior of the NFL, that be better off without him. He mentions the Giants, he mentions the Jets, he mentions all these teams that, how did they not go out and get Jimmy Garoppolo? Well, when you have Ayuk and you have Deebo Samuel and you have Christian McCaffrey and you have George Kittle and you have an offensive line that plays like they do, you don't need a quarterback. You can have some guy that can read a playbook that says, I'm supposed to throw it to him. I'm supposed to throw it to him. Exactly, Jay. It's one of those things where, again, it's the system and it's the talent around them. For someone to say that Jimmy Garoppolo would make a big difference with the New York Giants other than over Daniel Jones is crazy, because he still didn't have anybody to throw to. He still can only hand off to the same guy that they have. They only have one running back that's really in himself to be a good change the pace back, which has been a real breath of fresh air for the Giants. But I don't see anything changing. This defense for San Francisco is so good. Looking back at some of the stats for the year, it's unbelievable that they've given up 31 touchdowns. They have 44 sacks. They've only given up 4,700 yards of offense. It's incredible how much better they are than other teams. Their differential on turnovers is 13. I mean, it's an unbelievable matchup as far as good as Geno Smith has played, and I give him a lot of credit. He has played well. He stepped into a weird. Carroll's done this before with Russell Wilson, where he's decided who the better quarterback is over the guy that was supposed to be the starter. They had brought in Flynn from Green Bay, paid him a ton of money, and he wound up not playing because he realized Russell Wilson was a better quarterback. At this point, they said, Geno Smith's fine. Geno can play. And you've got Metcalf and you've got Lockett and you've got a couple other guys up there. And then they found a running game with Walker. So I think that their offense is good in Seattle, but this San Francisco defense is so dominant at this point that it's hard to believe that they're going to come up with some sort of system, some sort of game plan that's going to make any of that irrelevant, except if they can just run the ball more than they normally do, because it's the only. And there's another Bosa up there in San Francisco, and they got a couple of guys there that are just so good. I think it's going to be a long day for Seattle just for that. I don't think they're going to be able to put out a lot of points on the board. And there's still that undisciplined team, right? Even though
especially second half of the season.
Yeah. And there's some unquestionable. I know there's some questionable calls in the Ram game, and I agree with some of the assessment of the officiating in that game. But there's no sense of putting yourself in that position because you let somebody else make a decision for you. Did you mean to hit the guy out of bounds? Did you mean to take your helmet off? Did you mean to do this? Did you mean to do that? Did you mean to bump the referee? Did you mean to push the trainer in the back? You don't put because you're putting it in somebody, Carol, hey, you guys, you want on Fridays? I don't care. You guys go out, get in trouble, do whatever you want, like he did at USC, and he's done all the time in Seattle. But I don't see this being a really close matchup. I think they've beaten them twice. They beat them early on, like you said. They beat them later in the year. They beat them on the 15th of December. There's no new wrinkle to this team on Seattle. Again, the new wrinkle was if you were going to beat San Francisco from week early in the year to late in the year, because you found the running game, because Walker's turned out to be very good, the kid from Michigan State. But all of a sudden, you go play them and they shut you down again. I don't see Seattle play maybe even 9 or 12. And again, there's not even a coaching comparison here at this point. It's got nothing to do with that. It's just pure talent.
No.
If you look at that San Francisco offense, my God, like I said, and that team, if they can keep those guys together for a while and keep some guys healthy, because if McCaffrey stays healthy and George Kittle stays healthy, and they don't trade Brandon Ayuk like they said they're going to do, and they don't seem to like to trade anybody, right? They didn't trade Garoppolo. They didn't trade a couple other guys that would have kind of made sense to trade if they were going to go the Trey Lance way. I don't know how this offense could slow down for a couple of years, except that left tackle that they like to move around and make them do different things gets hurt or decides to retire if they actually win. I don't see this offense slowing down at all, and this defense is just dominant. So I think this is the game that becomes unwatchable in the fourth quarter.
You know, it's funny, Joe. I mean, we did our, you know, our second half, you know, look ahead, and the team that I had as my team to watch in the second half was the Niners, and this was before Garoppolo got hurt. This was on the heels of not long after they acquired McCaffrey, and I knew what McCaffrey would bring to an offense where he wasn't the sole playmaker, you know, and they're able to utilize him in that dual threat role. And they haven't had a guy who can do the type of damage in both the running game and the passing game since Roger Craig was, you know, in the backfield with Joe Montana. What's interesting to me, and the 49ers are the exhibit A of, you know, you say that it doesn't matter who plays quarterback for them, but the thing is that Shanahan seems to always find quarterbacks who have the skill sets that perfectly fit his system. You know, you can say Jimmy Garoppolo, but Garoppolo is a system quarterback. I don't know that he would do better in a different system, but he's a good fit for this. Purdy's skill set is a good fit for Shanahan's offense. Jury's still out on Trey Lance, and will be, because, you know, Lance on the surface doesn't appear to be your typical Shanahan quarterback. The only reason Brock Purdy is surprising everybody is because he's Mr. Irrelevant in terms of where he was drafted. But if you just look at his skill set, he's a perfect system quarterback for Shanahan's system, and he's making the right calls. The moment doesn't seem too big for him. And yeah, it helps to have all of those playmakers on his side of the ball and have Bosa and company wrecking havoc on the other side. Like I said San Francisco was the team to watch, but even I didn't think they'd be this good in the second half of the season. They're the prohibitive NFC Super Bowl pick. Say what you want about the Eagles. I'm gonna say it right here. I'm on the 49ers bandwagon.
And I think, Jay, you make a good point about the quarterback, again, being a system guy. He does need to be the star, right? He came out, nobody wanted to draft him the whole bit, however he was recruited in college. I don't even know, but I'm sure he wasn't highly recruited.
No.
Guys, again, that doesn't have to be the star, right? He doesn't mind saying, hey, I'll throw it to one of those five guys.
Just has to be a point guard. Has to be a point guard. Get the ball to the guys who are going to make the plays. And you know what? He's got great numbers, but it's because he's done a really good job as a point guard distributing the ball.
And I think McCaffrey gets even better because Cam Newton needed to be the star, right? He wouldn't give him the ball. If they were on inside the 5-yard line, Cam Newton wasn't giving that ball to anybody because he wanted to be the guy to do the Superman thing and go up to the stand.
Yep.
So now you got a guy that goes, oh, I got Christian McCaffrey back here. You can do that. And that's fine. That's what you do. I do something else. That's what you do. So I think it's a better fit all around for everybody. And I agree with you. They are the scary team. I think that's the team to get to the Super Bowl.
I think it's the most talented team in the NFC, and that's, I think, not
agreed. Yeah, on both sides of the ball.
Agreed, but there's always more talk about it that for a different day, because I think San Francisco is going to get through this. Although, watch out, there's a lot of rain going on in today's game, so there will be very little throwing of the ball in that game. So be aware. All right, I'm going to quickly touch on the Dolphins and the Bills because Skylar Thompson is the quarterback for the Dolphins this Sunday. Unfortunately, Tua Tagovailoa got another concussion on Christmas Day. He had been very solid for the Dolphins at quarterback. He was lagging a little bit at the end of the season because he was playing better talent, San Francisco, Los Angeles, and then Buffalo. We'll talk about that in just a second. But overall, this team with Skylar Thompson, the quarterback, and Teddy Bridgewater says he's going to try everything in his power to get himself to at least be able to be the backup tomorrow. So I believe Mike Glennon would have to be the backup if it wasn't Bridgewater. And that might help a tiny little bit, but this is going to be a disaster of a game, I feel like. They're going to be in Buffalo. Buffalo is playing for DeMar Hamlin. Hamlin may or may not be there. We're not sure, but he will definitely, I would assume, be at one of a possible 2 playoff games that Buffalo will have. They might have 3, but I think it'll be more likely 2. But Buffalo has been very good all season. You don't necessarily feel like they've reached their full potential yet. Josh Allen has been a very good quarterback this season, just hasn't been able to, has had a more than uncommon amount of interceptions, almost like how Mahomes played last year. You think sometimes Josh Allen is trying to do too much. Miami, again, no Tua, no Raheem Mostert, who was really the key in that Week 17 game against the Jets, the worst possible game I think I've seen all season. And honest to God, I mean, I think there's not really a path I see for Miami winning this game. It's a tough spot. This Miami team has been beat up all year. I think Mike McDaniel is not a guy who can get another quarterback to play in his system, and it's not easy for a first-year head coach for that to happen. He'll learn over time. But I do think Buffalo is going to win that game going away. They played 2 very close games throughout the season, 2 classics, actually. 21-19 in that Week 3 crazy game where Buffalo was kind of beaten by the elements of hot weather. And then they got a little bit of snow, got to clean it off, and won 32-29 at the gun in Week 15 up in Buffalo. It'll be something this round 3, but if it's under the 30, if it's within 14 points, I'll be a little surprised. Now, the Tampa Bay Bucks and Dallas Cowboys are the final game on Monday night, and they played a classically boring game in Week 1, 19-3. It was in Dallas, but the tables have turned. Dallas ended the season after that game 12-4, although end of the year they kind of struggled a little bit. Their defense was not on par, and their offense was kind of all out of sorts. Dak Prescott went, I think, 14-34 for 148 in the finale of a game. That meant something going in against the Washington Commanders and SFvsSEA third. Otherwise, Dallas had some big victories late this season. The win against the Eagles, even though it didn't help their playoff position, really helped themselves get back into a groove offensively. And ironically enough, that was Dak's best game of the year. Team has had a very good year with the running game. Ezekiel Elliott and Tony Pollard have finally collabed the right way, not in a way that no one is complaining anymore. It's like you should be using Pollard on this drive. Pollard is basically the lightning. And Ezekiel Elliott, or what's left of his body at this point of his career, is the thunder, and it's been working out pretty well. Dallas needs to get out of their own way in a lot of different situations. There's always a media circus that will always be following Dallas from station to station to station. And for this game on Monday, I think they are under the pressure of almost any team. They're Dallas Cowboys. They haven't won in the playoffs in a few years. I think it was 2018. They got their last victory. And most importantly, they're going up against the 8-9 Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And say what you want about Tom Brady, he is the definition of doing too much as a quarterback this season. Wide receivers have just not been able to do a lot for him. The only time he's really got Mike Evans to work for him at all this entire year was in that Week 17 victory that got them the division against Carolina, going for 210 yards and 3 touchdowns. The one thing I will have to say about Tampa Bay is this is a nothing to lose type game. I feel like Tom Brady, obviously, 7 Super Bowls has done it all, but I do feel like there's a little sense of, at least in that game, this sort of screw it type attitude. We know what we have here. And Tampa has, outside of that victory, and that victory doesn't even qualify, no signature victories over the rest of the season. They had to come back in dramatic fashion against the Rams. They had to come back in dramatic fashion at home against the Saints. They had to come back in dramatic fashion on the road against the Trace McSorley-led Arizona Cardinals. This is an 8-9 team. They are the 4th team to win a division in the history of the NFL with a losing record. But 2 of those teams won their wild card games. The Carolina Panthers, who I think Jay mentioned way back against the team that the Arizona Cardinals beat into 2014, and then the Seattle Seahawks in the infamous beast mode game in 2010 or 2011. So this is going to be a very interesting prospect because the game may not be great. The game could be a blowout. Dallas could actually, if both teams play up to the full potential that they have this year, Dallas wins this game going away. But this game is close going into the 4th quarter. And everything is on the line for Dallas. The circus is huge. The stage is huge. You have the biggest game of the weekend ending the weekend. It may not be good, but it's going to be fun.
And, you know, you say what you want about, the pressure being all on Dallas. And I think the one thing that kind of adds to that pressure, especially maybe for Dak Prescott, is the guy on the other sideline, because Dallas can ill afford to have this be a field goal type game where, if they're up by, 2 and, Brady has, a minute and a half, you don't want Tom Brady having the ball on the last drive with a chance to knock you out. Because I'll tell you this, if it comes down to that, if Dallas allows that to be that type of game, yeah, Brady's going to beat them because he's Tom effing Brady. And that's what he does.
Yeah. Also, I'll say this too about Dallas is that Dallas play up and down to the opponents more than any team that I've seen this year. You think about last week against Washington and even in the game against Jacksonville, a game that they probably should have won handily. And then you think about the game against Minnesota, well, it looked like the best team in football for that afternoon. I mean, the Cowboys are just one extreme to the other. Like, we don't, to be honest, I don't know what Cowboy team can show up Monday night. Is it going to be the Cowboy team that allow lesser teams to kind of hang around and eventually beat them in the end? Or the team that we saw in Minneapolis a few months ago play up to their full potential and make the game a laugher?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's going to be a very fun wild card weekend. A superb wild card weekend, to say the least. And don't forget, this is the weekend where we start the overtime rule that both teams must possess the ball regardless of what happens on the first drive. We have to go, but I have a lot of things to say about that, and then I might get to them on the next show, but we'll talk about that. All right, for Jay Kaplan and Anthony Strait, my name is Stephen Rabinowitz. Thank you, Joe Tufaro, for joining us yet again. I know it's early, so you can finally have your coffee on the West Coast and actually enjoy playoff games at a reasonable hour and actually have a life on Saturday night after they're all done. So enjoy that. So what can you find us? We are on Twitter at ONTH Sportslines, where you will find the link to this show and many other nuggets. Where will that link send you? It'll send you to youtube.com/OnTheSportsLine, where you can see this and many different shows again. And of course, facebook.com/OnTheSportsLines if you've been watching us live, or if you just want to watch this on demand in just a moment after this is done. Next week is what people say is the greatest weekend of the NFL calendar, even though there's only 4 games compared to 6 this weekend. Although if you see the 6, I think you'll understand why. But I think you'll enjoy it, and we'll be back with you next week. Good morning, good afternoon, and have a good evening from On the Sports Lines.
Have a good one.